Hey there, welcome to Little Fish, Big Stories. I'm your host, Little Fish. Now you might be wondering, why Little Fish? Well, do I have a story for you? It starts out with my uncle. My uncle used to tell me all kinds of crazy stories when I was little. Just things that he'd done, places he'd been. And he'd been almost everywhere, and he'd done almost everything. And when I was little, my uncle was the coolest guy I knew. I wanted to be just like him when I grew up. He told me about all these crazy adventures that he'd been on. But as I got older, I started to question some of the stories. They seemed just too crazy. Too unreal. Have you ever heard of a fish story? It's when someone catches a fish, pull it into the boat, it's only this big. They're the only one in the boat though. So, when they get back, they tell the story a little bit different. The fish was this big! Biggest fish I've ever seen! Took my line, jumped into the water, it's crazy, I almost got it. It was this close! That's a fish story. So I started calling him Uncle Big Fish, because his stories always seemed bigger than they actually were. As I got older still, I found a new love for my uncle's stories. That's when they became legends. So now, I'd like to tell you guys the legend of the Howling Falls. This comes from a time that my uncle was back in Guyana, South America, and he was skimming oil off the rivers. This meant that you take your boat, let it go downriver, and you take a bin or a little pan and scoop oil, because oil floats on top of water. You scoop the oil and put it in an oil drum. And my uncle had been doing this for a long time. But this time, something very different happened. In one of the scoops that he made, he noticed there was something extra in the oil. He put it into the barrel and looked around. Whatever it was swirling around in the oil. My uncle, being as brave as he was, he stuck his hand into the oil and pulled out an electric eel. Just like that, it shocked him. Ah! Hit the deck, face down, still holding this eel. My uncle was terrified. He said, if I was in the water, I would have died. But he wasn't. He was on the boat. And being shocked, it kept all of his muscles tense. He couldn't move his legs, he couldn't move his arms, he couldn't move even his mouth properly. So when he fell, he was like, ah! His mouth was stuck open. Now, after a while, my uncle started hearing something that was far more scary than the eel that he was holding. He heard the sound of this largest single drop waterfall on the planet, Howling Falls. He was heading towards the edge of Howling Falls, and if he didn't get up soon, he was going to fall over the edge of the falls, and that would probably be the end of my uncle. Since he lived to tell the story, I'll explain what happened. All he could think to do was yell for help. With his body being seized, he couldn't quite yell properly. He yelled like this. Ah! 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 Now here's where the story gets really crazy. When he did that, something answered back. He heard noises in the trees that were along the banks of the river. but it wasn't like he did it. It was kind of different. He said it sounded like this. It went, ooh, 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 ooh. My uncle was terrified. He had no idea what was going on. And after a while, he heard a little noise. Dum, dum, dum. Something was in the boat, and it was dragging something with it. My uncle was sure this was it. He wasn't making it out of this alive. Then he saw this little hand, this little red hand, come in front of him. And then another hand put a stick in the other hand. The stick came crashing down on his arm. Whack! He saw out of the corner of his eye another hand pick up the eel, and throw it into the river. My uncle wasn't sure what happened. He got up, looked around. There was nothing. Checked his arm. It was fine. Whatever it was gone. Whatever made the sound was gone. The eel was gone. My uncle wanted to try and yell again, but he said, I think I'll just leave it. He went to the front of the boat, turned the engine on, and took off. To this day, my uncle has no idea what saved him. Maybe you know. What do you think it was? If you enjoyed the story, leave a like. Comment down below if you have any idea what saved my uncle. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe. I'll try and do a new story every week. Until then, may your imagination and your love be boundless.